Part 1: The Moon Landing Debate, Origins and Questions. Introduction. On July 20th, 1969, millions around the world watched as Neil Armstrong took his historic first steps on the lunar surface. Yet over 5 decades later, a significant number of people continue to question the authenticity of the moon landings. This documentary series aims to explore the reasons behind these doubts, examining the evidence, the inconsistencies, and the cultural context that have fueled skepticism. Our goal is not to assert conspiracy, but to understand the questions that persist and why they matter. The emergence of doubt. The first major wave of moon landing skepticism can be traced back to 1976 with the publication of We Never Went to the Moon, America's $30 billion swindle by Bill Kaysing, a former technical writer at Rocketdyne. Kaysing lacked formal scientific credentials, but raised questions about the feasibility of the Apollo missions, citing perceived anomalies in NASA's documentation and media. Kaysing's claims, though widely debunked by experts, resonated with a public increasingly disillusioned by events like the Vietnam War and the Watergate scandal. His work laid the groundwork for a host of conspiracy theories that would gain traction in the ensuing decades. Key points of contention. Several recurring themes have emerged in moon landing skepticism. Photographic anomalies. Critics point to inconsistencies in lighting, shadows, and the apparent absence of stars in lunar photographs. For instance, some argue that the crosshairs in certain images appear behind objects, suggesting manipulation. However, experts attribute these effects to overexposure and the limitations of film technology at the time. The Van Allen radiation belts. The Apollo missions required astronauts to pass through the Van Allen belts, zones of intense radiation surrounding Earth. Skeptics question how astronauts could survive this journey. NASA explains that the spacecraft's trajectory minimized exposure and that the duration of transit was brief, resulting in radiation doses well within safe limits. Lost technology. Some argue that NASA has lost the technology to return to the moon, citing statements from officials about the challenges of reconstructing the Apollo-era equipment. NASA acknowledges that while the original hardware and documentation may no longer be available, the knowledge and capability to return to the moon exist, as evidenced by the ongoing Artemis program. Missing tapes. The original high-quality recordings of the Apollo 11 moonwalk were inadvertently erased and reused during the 1980s. While low-quality copies remain, the loss of the original tapes has fueled suspicion among skeptics. Cultural and psychological factors. The persistence of moon landing skepticism can also be attributed to broader cultural and psychological factors. Distrust in authority. Historical events like Watergate and the Vietnam War eroded public trust in government institutions, creating fertile ground for conspiracy theories. Media influence. Films like Capricorn 1, which depicted a faked Mars landing, and more recently, Fly Me to the Moon, have popularized the idea of space mission hoaxes, blurring the line between fiction and reality. Cognitive biases. Psychological phenomena, such as confirmation bias and the Dunning-Kruger effect, can lead individuals to favor information that supports their beliefs and overestimate their understanding of complex topics. The questions surrounding the moon landings are multifaceted, encompassing technical, cultural, and psychological dimensions. While the scientific consensus affirms the authenticity of the Apollo missions, the persistence of skepticism highlights the importance of transparency, education, and critical thinking. Next, we will delve deeper into the photographic evidence, examining the claims of anomalies and the explanations provided by experts. They were meant to be proof. The photographs from the Apollo missions, stark, surreal, iconic, remain etched into the collective memory of humanity. Boots on powdery soil dot the American flag standing stiff against a black sky, a lonely, dusty land stretching into silence. But within these images, others have seen something else. Not proof, but puzzles. And those puzzles have led to decades of doubt. Why, for instance, do the photographs show no stars in the sky? On the moon, with no atmosphere and no light pollution, wouldn't the stars appear even brighter than they do on Earth? And yet, in image after image, the lunar sky remains completely black, empty. Was it a technical limitation or something else? Then there are the crosshairs, those tiny white or black plus marks etched into the camera lenses, meant to calibrate and verify authenticity. But in certain images, the crosshairs appear to be behind objects, embedded in flags, hidden by gear. How can a crosshair that was on the lens appear behind an object in the frame? Was it a photographic glitch? Or is there another explanation? Another set of questions arises when examining the shadows. In many photos, shadows cast by astronauts and equipment don't run parallel. They angle away from each other, almost as if lit by multiple light sources. On the moon, there is only one, the sun. So why would the shadows behave this way? Could the surface terrain alone explain such divergence? Or was it studio lighting? And then there's the flag. We've all seen the video, the American flag being planted on the lunar surface. But watch closely, and you'll notice something odd. The flag moves. It ripples, twists, it looks, undeniably like it's fluttering. But how can a flag move in a vacuum? There's no air, no wind. Some say it was just the motion of the astronauts. But that's not the question here. The question is, why did it move at all? Many have also noticed strange similarities in background terrain. In different Apollo photos, allegedly taken miles apart, the same exact hills appear in the distance. And how about the quality of the photos themselves? The astronauts were wearing bulky gloves. The cameras were mounted to their chests. They had no viewfinders. And yet, many of the photos are perfectly composed, sharply focused, beautifully framed, and lit like magazine covers. Is that the product of rigorous training and luck? Or were the images captured under more controlled conditions? These questions may seem small on their own. A shadow here, a starless sky there. But it's the accumulation of details, the little inconsistencies that keeps the door to doubt slightly open, even after more than half a century. We're not here to provide answers. We're here to ask, why do these photographic inconsistencies exist? Why do they continue to fuel doubt? And why have so few of these questions ever received clear, unified answers? They say we left our mark on the moon. 6 missions, 12 astronauts, thousands of pounds of equipment, and according to official records, a trail of footprints, tools, lunar modules, and even mirrors, all still resting on the silent surface of the moon. But how much of it can we actually see? And more importantly, why haven't we seen more? One of the most talked about artifacts is the retroreflector, a mirror-like device said to have been placed on the moon to reflect laser beams back to Earth. Scientists claim they can still bounce lasers off these panels today, proving the landings happened. But if that's true, why can't everyday observers, amateur astronomers, universities, independent labs consistently replicate these results? If the reflectors work, where's the direct evidence available to the public? Then there's the mission report. The lunar module left the descent stage due to weight restrictions and logistical constraints. But over 5 decades later, with vastly improved telescopes and satellites, why haven't we seen high-resolution images of these artifacts? We've seen distant galaxies, surface details on Mars, and even close-ups of Pluto. But the lunar landers, supposedly just 384,000 kilometers away, remain elusive to the average viewer. Why? NASA claims the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter has captured images of landing sites. Grainy, gray spots and vast fields of shadow. But critics ask, why are the images so unclear? Why do they require interpretation? Why can't we simply see with clarity what should be sitting in plain view? And then there are the footprints. Apollo astronauts allegedly left visible footprints in the moon's dusty surface, perfectly preserved in an environment with no wind or water. But this leads to a strange contradiction. How could footprints be so well defined, and yet the heavy thrust of the landing module leave no visible crater or disturbance? Shouldn't the lander have kicked up dust, blasted out a mark, or left some evidence of the powerful engines used to descend? What about the flag? The American flag was planted on the moon multiple times. Some say it's still there, but is it? Has anyone ever seen it since? If it was visible from Earth or by satellite, wouldn't we be seeing it on posters and documentaries in museums? Instead, we're told it's probably been bleached white by solar radiation, a detail easy to believe, but also impossible to confirm. And then, perhaps most curiously, there's the absence of retrieval. We've returned to space. We've orbited the Earth thousands of times. We've landed rovers on Mars. But in over 50 years, no manned mission has returned to the moon to revisit the Apollo sites, not to retrieve the equipment, not to film it in high definition, not even to walk among the landmarks of our supposed greatest triumph. Why not? Was there nothing more to learn from those sites? No value in revisiting them? Or would doing so raise too many questions? What would we find or not find if we went back? These are not accusations. These are questions. Where is the physical evidence that remains accessible and verifiable? Why does so much of it feel just out of reach? And in a world obsessed with documentation, why does something so historic feel so unconfirmed? The Apollo astronauts are celebrated as heroes, pioneers, the first humans to set foot on another world. Their names are etched into history. Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, Michael Collins, Alan Shepard. But for some observers, it's not just what they did. It's how they've spoken or not spoken about it since. For an event so monumental, so defining, one might expect these men to have told their stories with fire and passion for the rest of their lives. And yet, many of them became strangely reserved. Why? Neil Armstrong, the first man on the moon, famously shunned the spotlight. He rarely gave interviews, avoided media appearances, and remained mostly silent about his experience. Was that simply humility, personality, or did he carry a burden, one that couldn't be publicly discussed? At public events, when asked about their missions, several astronauts have appeared visibly uncomfortable. Some offer vague, general answers. Some seem to change details over time. Why do their testimonies sometimes shift? And what about the emotional response? We've seen astronauts cry when recalling the view of Earth from space. But when asked about walking on the moon, arguably the greatest achievement in human history, why do some of them look empty, distant, even evasive? In the 1990s, a man named Bart Sibrel confronted several Apollo astronauts, asking them to swear on the Bible that they had walked on the moon. While some refused and walked away, Buzz Aldrin famously punched him in the face. Why such strong reactions? Why not just answer the question calmly and clearly? And then there are the statements that have sparked confusion. In various NASA documentaries and interviews, astronauts have made curious remarks, including references to technology that we no longer have, and to challenges in returning to the moon. If we went there in 1969, why would returning now be described as unusually difficult or uncertain? One NASA engineer once admitted, "We destroyed that technology and it's a painful process to build it back again." Why would such a crucial technology be destroyed? Why wasn't it preserved, archived, rebuilt, especially in an age of superior engineering? Then there's the broader issue of contradictory memories. Different astronauts sometimes describe the lunar surface in subtly different ways. Its color, its texture, the way shadows moved, the stars they could or couldn't see. Could this simply be the result of time? Or do these inconsistencies reflect something deeper? In every major human achievement, wars, revolutions, discoveries, we see people speak about it for decades. In detail, with pride, with consistency, and yet, in the case of the moon landings, silence and discomfort seem to echo louder than celebration. So we ask, why were some of these men reluctant to speak publicly? Why have their statements contradicted one another? And why, after achieving something so historic, did so many seem haunted rather than humbled? In July 1969, the world paused to watch a single moment, human beings landing on the moon. But behind that powerful image was a time of enormous tension. The late 1960s were not just a period of exploration. They were a time of division, rivalry, and pressure. One of the key drivers of space exploration was the ongoing space race, a competition between the United States and the Soviet Union. The goal was not only to explore, but to be first, to show strength, and to prove capability to the world. Was the race to the moon purely about science? Or was it also about leadership, perception, and influence on the global stage? The U.S. had made a public promise to land on the moon before the end of the decade. The clock was ticking. Resources were committed. The world was watching in such a high-stakes environment. What kind of pressure did that create? And how did that pressure shape decisions in government, in media, and in public communication? When we consider what was at stake, we begin to see another side of the story. Landing on the moon wasn't just a mission. It became a moment that was meant to inspire, to uplift, and to assure people that progress was possible, even during difficult times. Many people today ask questions about how that story was told. They wonder, How much of what we saw was designed to boost public morale? How important was the idea of being first, not just in science, but in the story that was told? And how did this shape what was shared and how it was remembered? During this same period, technology was changing fast, and so was media. The moon landing was one of the first events broadcast globally. People didn't just hear about it, they watched it live together. It became a shared experience. But with shared experience also comes shared memory and shared assumptions. When a story is told so powerfully and so completely, it becomes part of our identity. That's why for some, even asking questions about it feels uncomfortable. But questions are not rejection. Questions are how we understand history more fully. How did the world stage shape the timing, focus, and presentation of the event? And when a mission becomes a symbol, what kinds of pressures are added behind the scenes? We did it over 50 years ago. 6 successful crewed missions. 12 men walked on the surface of the moon. Billions watched in awe. And then it stopped. No one has returned since 1972. Why? And today, in an age of incredible technological advancement, has humanity not revisited the moon with the same confidence we supposedly had decades ago? More than that, why do some officials and engineers say we've lost the technology to do so? That idea is hard to imagine. In nearly every area of science and engineering, progress is constant. Phones, computers, medical tools, all smaller, faster, cheaper, and better. So why would something as historic as the ability to send humans to the moon not follow that same path? In interviews and documentaries, even NASA personnel have made surprising admissions. Some have stated that the systems used in the Apollo missions were dismantled, the blueprints lost or scattered, the expertise retired. Rebuilding them today, they say, would be an enormous undertaking, not because it's impossible, but because we no longer have the same tools, materials, or methods. That raises an unusual question. How does the most significant technology in human history just disappear? Shouldn't it have been preserved, stored, studied, passed down, and improved? If a technology was proven to work not once, but 6 times, why hasn't it been duplicated since? Some say it's a matter of funding, that the cost of lunar travel is too high for the returns. Others suggest it's political, that the moon was part of a race, and once that race was won, the motivation to continue faded. But then there are statements that go deeper. References to how we can't do it anymore, or that the process of getting back is far more complex than expected. In the 21st century, as new missions are being planned under programs like Artemis, there's still a sense of starting over, as if the past were a legend, not a blueprint. And so the questions multiply. If we really went to the moon so many times, why are we starting from scratch now? Why did we stop exploring it altogether after 1972? Why has no other country, even with modern technology, repeated that achievement with human beings? And what does it mean when even experts say we lost the knowledge to do it? In a time where almost everything is documented, archived, and shared, how could such a major piece of history become so difficult to replicate? Could it be that the systems used were so unique, so specific to their era, that they don't translate to modern methods? Or is there more to the story? The loss of technical capability is not, on its own, proof of anything. But it's a mystery, a quiet one, and one that fuels curiosity, not just among skeptics, but among historians, engineers, and space enthusiasts. It makes us ask, what kind of technology are we really talking about? Was it ever fully understood? And if it was, why didn't we protect it like we would any national treasure? July 20th, 1969, an estimated 600 million people around the world tuned in to witness history, a man stepping onto the surface of the moon. It was a defining moment, not only for space travel, but for television itself. It was the first truly global broadcast. But when we pause and reflect on that moment, new questions emerge. Not about what was said, but about how it was shown. Why did the video footage appear so blurry and low resolution, even by the standards of 1969? If NASA had access to advanced photographic technology, including high-resolution cameras for still images, why were the videos transmitted in such poor quality? We're told that the original video feed was downlinked in a format incompatible with standard broadcast, and so it was filmed off a monitor, effectively capturing a copy of a copy. But this leads to another question. Why weren't the original high-resolution tapes preserved? According to official reports, they were later overwritten and lost. But why would the most important footage in human history be reused, erased, or misplaced? Who made that decision? And how is it that so few people even knew it happened until decades later? Beyond the footage, we also ask about the broadcast control. In an age before the internet, before satellites were widespread, and before independent media could verify live signals, how many people actually saw the landing firsthand? How much of what we experienced was mediated through a central source? And what kind of trust did that require? When we look back, we see images that feel burned into the public mind. The grainy figure descending the ladder, the flag planted, the lunar module alone in the vastness. But what if that sense of memory is more about the power of storytelling than personal recollection? The use of film techniques, multiple camera angles, rehearsed dialogue, scripted mission control communication, all added to the cinematic feel of the experience. The broadcast didn't just show the landing. It framed it, edited it, narrated it. And that leads to more questions. How much of what we saw was live? How much was pre-recorded? How much was recreated? Why do some scenes look lit in ways that feel unnatural, with deep shadows, diffused surfaces, and oddly even exposure? Were all the visual elements captured in real time? Or were some produced after the fact to fill in gaps, enhance the story, or simply provide clarity? Then there are the documentaries and Hollywood dramatizations that followed. Films like For All Mankind, Apollo 13, and First Man have further shaped how we imagine the moon missions. But do they reinforce memory or replace it? In the years since, countless interviews and remastered versions of footage have been released. But why are many of the original master recordings still unavailable to the public? Why have some camera angles, like the famous shot of the lunar module descending, never been fully explained? Who filmed them and from where? Again, these aren't accusations. They're questions. How did the media frame the moon landing in ways that shaped belief and disbelief? What was live and what was edited? And why, when we look back, do some moments feel more like a production than a raw transmission? For an event as meticulously planned and recorded as the Apollo moon missions, One might expect consistency in memory, in transcript, in detail. And yet, over time, small inconsistencies have emerged. Not explosive, not definitive, but curious. Just curious enough to invite questions. Take, for example, the mission transcripts. Official logs of dialogue between astronauts and mission control exist, detailed and time-stamped. But in various public interviews, astronauts have at times described moments, feelings, or visual details that don't appear in those transcripts. Are these simply lapses in memory? Understandable differences between official records and personal recollection? Or are parts of the record missing? What about the phrase heard around the world? That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Neil Armstrong later insisted he had said, or intended to say, for a man. But the recording doesn't clearly capture that. Was it a simple radio glitch? A stumble? Or something altered in transmission? Then there's the question of environmental details. In some accounts, astronauts describe a smell inside the lunar module, something like spent gunpowder after returning from the surface. But others don't mention it. Was that experience universal or unique? If it was caused by lunar dust reacting to oxygen, why didn't all the astronauts comment on it? Descriptions of the lunar sky also vary. Some say they saw no stars, others mention faint glimpses. Still, others have said the brightness of the moon made it difficult to see beyond. Why such a range of answers? And when it comes to lighting and visibility, there are questions about how clearly astronauts could see objects in the distance, even the Earth hanging in the sky. Why are some descriptions poetic and detailed, while others are vague or even evasive? There are also moments when astronaut answers seem practiced, or restrained. In press conferences, questions about what they felt, what they saw, or how they reacted are sometimes met with short, subdued answers. Was it simply professionalism, fatigue, or something else? And then there are changes over time. Some astronauts have adjusted their wording in later interviews, or declined to speak publicly at all. Was this a natural result of aging and distance from the event? Or is there a discomfort in repeating a story that no longer feels entirely clear? Even mission details like timing, exact sequences, or small technical procedures are remembered differently by different crew members. Again, this may be normal, but it raises a fair question. How can such a brief, life-altering experience produce so many different versions of the same story? Consider the mission logs. If every second of the mission was tracked from launch to splashdown, why are some brief periods of time underdocumented? Why are some voice recordings missing? Why do some moments lack visual accompaniment? And why has there been so little effort to explain those gaps? These inconsistencies don't prove or disprove anything on their own, but they do add to the atmosphere of uncertainty that surrounds the story for some people. So we ask, how much of what we know comes from documentation and how much from memory? Why do even the astronauts themselves sometimes seem unsure or inconsistent in their retellings? And how can the most significant event in human exploration leave behind such a scattered mosaic of details? When questions go unanswered, theories begin to grow. For over 50 years, alternative explanations for the Apollo moon landings have surfaced, evolved, and taken on lives of their own. Some are detailed and technical. Others are emotional or philosophical, but all of them emerge from a common root: uncertainty. What happens when official answers don't feel complete? Or when elements of a story, even a globally accepted one, seem to leave gaps behind? That's where the alternative narratives begin. One of the most well-known theories is that the moon landing was partially or entirely staged, perhaps filmed on Earth using Hollywood-style sets and special effects. Proponents often reference the work of director Stanley Kubrick, whose film 2001, A Space Odyssey, released just a year before Apollo 11. Could the timing and the technical realism of that film be more than coincidence? Others suggest the landings may have been real in part, but with aspects reenacted or embellished later for public consumption. Missing footage, lost tapes, or unclear audio could have been filled in to create a seamless story for global broadcast. Some propose that the Apollo missions were successful in reaching space, but didn't make it to the moon. Instead, they orbited Earth or another region of space and returned, while footage and images were created to fulfill the narrative. There are even deeper, more speculative theories, ones that suggest secret missions, classified discoveries, or encounters that were kept from public view. These are rarely supported by evidence, but they speak to something human, the desire to understand what we're not being told. Some theories don't deny the moon landings at all, they accept them, or question why they stopped. Why, after achieving something so incredible, did we retreat? Why did space exploration slow down in its boldest direction? Was it money, politics, or something we found and chose not to revisit? And then there are those who look not at the moon, but at Earth, and ask why belief matters. For some, the moon landing is not about facts, but faith in institutions. If we believe it happened, it's a symbol of human potential. If we doubt it, it becomes a symbol of manipulation. Alternative theories often reflect disconnection between governments and citizens, between science and understanding, between reality and perception. And in an age of increasing access to information, more people are asking, why are some questions still met with silence or dismissal? Why do certain documents remain sealed or missing? Why does asking, even politely, even curiously, still make some people uncomfortable? It's important to recognize belief in alternative theories doesn't always come from ignorance. It often comes from observation, research, or even personal experience. When people feel excluded from the truth, they go looking for their own. So we ask, are these theories a reflection of the event itself or of how the event was communicated? Do they grow because something is hidden or because something was never explained well enough to begin with? And in a world filled with cameras, networks, and open data, how do some moments remain just out of reach? We've walked through shadows, not to deny, not to declare, but simply to ask. 10 chapters, 10 pieces of a story that for many is set in stone. For others, it's still unfolding. The moon landing is one of the most significant events in modern history. Whether viewed as a triumph of human spirit or a symbol of national ambition, it shaped the way we see ourselves, not just on Earth, but in the universe. But surrounding that story is something else. Silence, discomfort, uncertainty. We've asked about missing footage, lost technology, inconsistent memories, strange photographs, shifting testimonies, and media that shaped not only what we saw, but what we believe. We've explored the pressure of the Cold War, the race to be first, and the weight of expectation. And we've acknowledged the theories, the ones whispered, debated, dismissed, and obsessively studied. But here, at the end, no single answer emerges. Instead, what remains is the space between the questions, a quiet place where doubt and belief coexist. It's important to say, doubt is not disrespect. Doubt is not denial. Doubt is the engine of progress. It's the willingness to look again, to ask more, to admit that certainty, especially when delivered in a neat package, is always worth examining. Because history is not only what happened, it's how we remember, how we're told, how we're shown dot, and sometimes how we're not. So we ask one final time, why does this event, above all others, generate such deep, persistent questioning? Why do so many feel uncomfortable, even hearing the questions spoken aloud? And why, after 5 decades, do so many still feel there are pages missing from the story? Maybe it's because the moon landing wasn't just about science, it was about belief. A moment broadcast across the world, not just to inform, but to inspire. And belief, once formed, becomes hard to question, even when questions remain. In this documentary, we haven't claimed truth or fiction. We haven't declared what happened, or what didn't. We've only done what so few are still willing to do. Ask. Ask why some images don't match the light. Ask why silence followed a moment that should echo forever. Ask why something so public feels so unreachable. Ask why, in a time of infinite information, certain answers remain missing. The moon will always be there. So will the footprints, the questions, the legacy. But maybe the real journey, the one that matters, isn't whether we walked on the moon, but whether we're still brave enough to explore the truth wherever it leads. Even if we never find it,